David, level set for us sort of this audio opportunity. What's going on with streaming audio, how it's of course different from broadcast audio, but tell us a little bit about what's happening and about the role of True Optic.
Yeah, so streaming audio really is a kind of a fascinating medium. It's really in some ways a new form of entertainment. It's really less about cannibalizing traditional radio and I think more about extending audio entertainment occasions and enabling new forms of audio entertainment like podcasts. So, while OTT, which is what True Optic is really known for, connected TV targeting and measurement, was really, and it really is largely a replacement for television. People watch it on the same screen in the same places for the most part, and they watch similar kinds of content. Streaming audio is not just a digital makeover of audio. It's more than that. It's really taking advantage of the portability of different connected devices like mobile phones, the advent of new at-home devices like smart speakers and voice-based personal assistants like the Echo, to allow consumers to be able to listen to audio in ways that sort of just complement whatever they're doing. So whether you're in the rush in the morning and you want a 5-minute weather forecast or 10-second weather forecast, or you want a 10-hour playlist that's really more ambient in the background while you're working, streaming audio allows for all of that sort of content to fit the occasion the consumer is in, and the devices that are out there, and streaming audio's compatibility with all these new kinds of connected devices allows it to be able to be listened to wherever and whatever the consumer is doing.
So David, tell us some of the trends that you're seeing either around devices, content, music, podcasts. What's sort of bubbling up? What's notable?
Yeah, so one of the things we really noticed is the smart speaker and voice-assisted, voice-based personal assistants have really taken off. And so what we've seen, and I think in combination with some of the work-at-home trends, the COVID-based changes in behaviors, that streaming audio is kind of returning radio to the living room. It's become kind of a central part of that new connected home entertainment nexus that includes connected TV, obviously, in-home gaming, and then streaming audio is really a key part of it. I mean, the number of hours a day people listen to this now is this, for those who do, is 2 to 3 hours a day on average. And so you're almost seeing like what we might have seen in the 1930s, right? When the big old radio was at the center of the living room and everybody crowded around it. It's not quite like that, but audio is returning to the home somewhat surprisingly, and it's thanks to the almost ironically, thanks to these new advanced types of digital devices.
So tell us about advertisers, what they can do to be part of this. Both in cross platforms. Now, some of the platforms we understand are kind of closed, right? Like the Apple Podcast. I mean, but some aren't. What are the opportunities for publishers and advertisers, in this audio world now, and how might that be changing?
So for advertisers, you think of streaming audio as sort of the digitization of radio, right? So you have the ability to now do advanced targeting, not just day part, drive time, that sort of thing, or content or contextual, but you can actually target based on who the listeners are and attributes around them. So we actually use our household graph, or our graph of connected devices that we've synced to third-party data sets that provide demographic and behavioral and interest-based information about audio listeners. And through that combination, advertisers can target very specifically based on a particular user's political interest, which we've seen has become very popular in the last couple of months on streaming audio, to things like what products they buy at the supermarket, are they in the market for a car or not? All the sorts of things that you would think of as available to target in a digital environment or on connected TV can now be done on audio. And of course, you get all the usual features of audio, kind of the intimacy, there's less clutter, and that sort of intimacy that comes with audio, as well as the sort of special kinds of content that are out there. So podcasts, for example, have a very loyal following. People listen to a podcast or become part of a podcast franchise, they will listen to that, religiously, and they'll pay attention. And, the average podcast is, 40 minutes to an hour, and more of these are becoming ad supported. So it's an opportunity, whether it's based on the context or the content of that podcast or the listening audience, to be able to, take advantage of a medium in which the consumer listener is very focused on what's going on. There's not a lot of advertising, and you could do, all sorts of things. You can do regular, 15-second audio ads. You can have, brand sponsorships where the host of the podcast or the show is, endorsing the product. All the usual creative options that are available in audio are available in streaming audio, but the targeting is much more precise. And so the flexibility to be able to, buy an ad, on short notice with a limited budget, to, doing it in advance, but with a national budget, you can target as specifically as you want, both geographically and in terms of the consumer profile. From a publisher standpoint, it's interesting. I mean, there are two models in streaming audio, much like with television and other media, with a subscription-based model where there's generally no commercials or very few commercials. And then there's the ad-supported model, which is actually growing faster in audio. And so we kind of play in the ad-supported space. And the opportunity for publishers who are running ad-supported platforms, a couple of things. I mean, one is very few of them are really integrated with any sort of a platform that allows them to do advanced audience-based targeting. Some of them put their inventory on programmatic platforms. Those platforms may or may not have a link to a service like a TrueOptic that allows for advanced data-driven targeting. So the opportunity to get more yield for audio inventory is really there, right? Not only is this space growing leaps and bounds, it's growing like 40% a year in terms of listening time over the last 2 or 3 years, but there's a sort of an opportunity to boost that by linking inventory to a data platform that allows advanced targeting and measurement of ads. In addition, what we're also seeing is that as audio content becomes more sort of syndicated across these new kinds of devices, like the smart speakers and the voice-assisted, voice-based assistants in particular, a lot of the content is not technically available on those platforms. It doesn't have the right technical, characteristics to be played through those platforms. And, particularly for some of the larger platforms, it very much is in publishers' interest to at least consider, if not go ahead and execute different versions of their content so that it's compatible with, the different sorts of devices, particularly the smart speakers and the newer voice-assisted listening devices that consumers have adopted. There's a huge opportunity there. And the need state as well is a really unique one where the consumers tends to be at home in a little bit more oftentimes of an engaged state and perfect for advertisers to really communicate with them, but the content has to be accessible and compatible.
And David, finally, in terms of the data set that TrueOptic has, is that utilized by the sell side or the buy side or both, or what are some use cases?
So it's available for both, much like our connected TV. I mean, right now, we're really seeing more activity on the buy side. But we feel, and we've talked to and are talking to several of the big publishing platforms, the big sort of holding companies in the audio space, about using our platform so that they can allow their inventory to be bought and sold on an audience-based addressable basis. As far as on the buy side, as I said earlier, we're seeing tremendous demand, for data-driven audio advertising, which is another reason the publishers ought to consider, integrating with a data targeting platform, DMP of some sort. First of all, even with all the demand we're seeing, most audio content, audio inventory is bought direct. So it's about 80% or so. So there's just a huge opportunity where almost none of that is being sold on an audience addressable basis. There is targeting of sorts. I mean, there's daypart targeting, there's contextual targeting, but what advertisers really want, and we're seeing this in TV, right? We saw it in digital, is the ability to target the audience that they really want to reach based on, advanced characteristics, not just demos, but interests and behaviors and so forth. And, it's all right there. The technology is there, the systems are there, the pipes are all built. And, it's just waiting for some of these audio publishers to, grab at that and just, whoever gets there first, I think is going to be really happy with, the level of interest that they see from buyers.
So, David, a lot of conversations about the deprecation of third-party cookies, the big changes that are coming up with the Apple mobile identifier. How does that impact the audio space? What are you hearing?
Yeah, that has a big impact on audio. Still, even though smart speakers and at-home listening is on the rise, the majority of streaming audio is still listened to on mobile devices, smartphones. And so a lot of the advertisers who are used to being able to do device level targeting based on IDFAs or cookies, mobile cookies, are kind of worried about what's going to happen to this space. And at TrueOptic, where we have more of a household based approach, and we're sort of keying in on identifiers other than IDFAs and cookies, we've had tremendous amount of traffic on the phone lines and in the info box about, can we help these folks? And we think that we can. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but there are ways to sync IDFAs and other sort of legacy mobile device identifiers to other more persistent signals if you have a really dense signal graph, which we, among others, happen to have. And so the opportunity is really there to do a couple of things. I mean, one is for the individual devices like the mobile phones and the tablets and laptops, things like that. There are ways to be able to tie the device signatures and other information about those users and devices to other signals that are not going to be deprecated. That's kind of a way to sort of bridge this a little bit. The second point is that there's a tremendous amount of activity, and it's growing fast on what really are home-based devices, next generation devices like smart speakers and the voice-based personal assistants. Those devices are really tailor-made for sort of IP-based and other household signal-based targeting. So, that's something that is not affected by IDFAs, never really would have been, but is a place that has probably been, sort of underserved and not thought about as much by audio advertisers. There's opportunity to just jump on that, and that's not going to be affected by any of these changes. The third thing to think about is, while we're pretty confident, and there's other companies out there that I think would say the same thing, that we can help audio advertisers make a bridge and sort of kind of find their way through this transition. It may not be quite what they're used to, but they'll be able to have a good sense of device identification and user level information, by syncing to these other sorts of signals before the IDFAs go away. However, we think, in the long run, a lot of digital addressable advertising, whether it's streaming audio or connected TV or even just internet-based messaging, is going to become much more opt-in. I mean, we see what's happening in California with the enhanced CCP legislation. And, we at TrueOptic, now TransUnion, are, really kind of leaning into the fact that we want to do right by the consumer. We know that opt-in and sort of consumer choice is going to be at the center of addressability in the not too distant future. And so, as some people have said, I think it's sort of, a little bit, Pollyannish, but hey, the deprecation of the cookie is a good thing in the IDFA, because, that's really not the way we want to reach consumers anyway. And, we agree with that. And we're sort of building that next generation sort of platform. But in the meantime, let's face it, today, audio advertisers and audio publishers are pretty much, indebted to the cookie and the IDFA. That's reality. And so what we're saying is we can help to make the bridge to the near-term future regarding the deprecation of those devices by linking to other device signals and other sorts of information that we have that can kind of bridge that gap going forward. And then in the long run, we're already working on solutions that are really more about kind of a consumer consent opt-in based targeting, and we'll be there when that time comes.